Okay, so I've assembled my tool tote body. One thing I forgot to note was because I was cutting the dado channel all the way through, I do end up with these holes on the bottom of my tool tote. If you will want to avoid that, you can put a stop on your fence and stop the cut partially through before it comes through the end grain. The only disadvantage of stop cuts on the table saw is that you always have to accommodate for the radius of the saw. So in this case, it's an 8-inch radius. It's gonna take probably at least an inch and a half before it no longer shows through the other side, which is an inch and a half of glue surface that you're losing. So if you're very particular and you want to have a stop cut, but you don't want to lose any glue surface, you'll be better off using a router table to make these channel cuts. Okay, so now I'm all set to do my front panels and fit them to this new dado cut that I've made. And you'll notice that I've set up a sacrificial fence on my fence here because I don't want to damage the laminate on my fence, and I'll be cutting right up to the edge of the blades here. So you never want the blade to come into contact with the fence or with your sacrificial fence while it's moving. So I'm going to deliberately overlap the blade with my sacrificial fence. I'm going to power on the saw, and I'm going to raise the blade up after the saw is fully powered on, and then I'm going to dial in the height of my cut. And I've clamped this fence from both ends here, making sure that I still have room for pieces to pass across the blade without interference. Okay, so now I've kind of overcompensated. That's definitely the furthest I'll ever have the fence, and definitely the highest I would ever have the blade. If I wanted to make this zero clearance, I could be a little bit more careful about how high I raise the blade. I could also make my sacrificial fence out of a more slippery material, like melamine, so that way it's easier to slide my piece across, or I can put some wax on here, so that way I'm not getting caught on the fibers of the plywood. The real advantage to this kind of cut is that, say I do have a big mistake, my piece comes away from the fence, it's actually moving away from the blade. There's no part to get trapped in between the blade and the fence, so it's an incredibly safe cut, which is why you see me doing something that would normally be extremely dangerous, which is making a cross cut against the fence. And in this case, it's not dangerous, but it's one of the only exceptions. So now I have to dial in both the width and depth of my cut to fit my tool tote. I'm going to start with the height, which I know is going to be about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to go deliberately undershoot it. And then afterwards I can adjust the width just by backing the fence away from the blade. So I'm going to treat this as my test piece, even though it's actually one of my regular pieces. And I'm going to continue to make adjustments to the fence and to the blade height until it drops nicely into this rabbet right here. so in this particular case, I decided to bottom out these pieces. A lot of times when you are fitting rabbeted panels like this, you leave a little bit of slop and a little bit of wiggle room, and you can kind of create a shadow reveal on all sides. In this case, I decided I wanted the flush look instead, which might be to my disadvantage. You can see here, I just got the measurement very slightly wrong, so it's off about a 64th of an inch, which creates a small gap, but it's not a big enough gap to look intentional. But I'm pretty happy with how they fit, and yeah, that's all it is to rabbets. Any kind of stopped rabbets are going to be more ideal on the router. Dado stack is obviously a lot more efficient and more suited to a production setting.